What evil prank have you pulled off?
People in school used to always take my Gatorade. So I took an empty bottle, filled it with dyed salt water, and let them take my drink. Not gonna lie, it was hilarious watching one person to spit salt water in the middle of class only for their unbelieving friend to do the same. I used to work for a cruise line. A passenger asked if the crew lives on the ship full time. I and my coworker explained that no, the crew leaves every night to fly back to Miami and then returns each morning. She walked away satisfied. After that cruise was over, our manager was sharing the passenger evaluations with us and was confused about one in particular. It was a woman who had stayed on deck 14 and had complained that she couldn't sleep at night because of the noise of the crew helicopter. Fact 1, 1,200 crew do not leave every night but do live on the ship. Fact 2, that ship didn't even have a helipad. Question, what the fuck was she hearing every night? Picked out every last marshmallow from my sister's box of Lucky Charms. Then took a photo of me eating a bowl of Just Charms, printed it, and put in the bottom of the bag. I then sealed the bag back up, hot glued the box and back in the pantry it went. I lived in Korea for a bit. When my mom came to visit, I told my Korean girlfriend it was an American custom to greet older women by touching elbows. I told my mom the same story about Korean customs. It was a thing of beauty. They were not pleased. One night I replaced every framed object in my boss's office with a picture of me making a stern face. Posters, certificates, photos, etc. Took like 3 hours because he had like 30 framed things in his office. The next day I made sure I was out doing field work to make him sit with it most of the day. He had a lot of foot traffic to look at his office that day. I worked in an office that had 4 offices with shared partitions that had glass at the top. My neighbor wasn't the most observant person and kind of a dick, so I started printing random pictures like Nicolas Cage and setting them on my side of the office facing into his. He never noticed. It got to the point where everyone else in the office would check what photo I had set that week, but he never caught on. Over a decade ago I worked in the warehouse of a Guitar Center. We dealt with inventory, shipping and receiving. We had a dumpster behind the store in a shared parking lot that people would leave random things in even though it was not a public dumpster. One day we found a broken beach chair in an open cardboard box. The box had a shipping label on it. It was left in such a way that it was easy to assume that the chair/box combo was left by the same person. We packed the beach chair in another box and shipped it back to the customer. I wish I was there to see the person's face when they received their trash back via UPS. I remember it like it was yesterday. At summer camp my cabin's leaders found a little snake that wasn't doing so well, so they decided to put it in an old terrarium in our cabin. A few of the guys were nervous about it. So the next day when the leaders decided the snake was well enough to release, I asked that they keep quiet about releasing it. When the other guys got back to the cabin and found no snake in the terrarium, chaos ensued. Not a prank I pulled off, but one I was victim to. My manager had left me in charge of the store when I was 16, not legal but that's a whole other mess, for a whole weekend. Saturday went well and I was happy with how I went, although my paranoid brain is always concerned about whether or not doors are actually locked. I'm the same with my house, but the store was worse. So I make my dad drive down to the store to double check that everything is okay. 15 minutes later I get a phone call from him saying manager and the police are here because the door was unlocked and people were inside. Cue to me on the floor in tears hyperventilating, while my dad is telling my mom, who had since picked up the phone, that he was only kidding and that everything was fine. Early days of networked PCs. DOS and NetWare. I worked in a computer lab on campus. There weren't a lot of management utilities available at the time, so I, and a few other student employees, wrote batch scripts and small programs to automate a few things when a student or professor would log on to the network. Having that sort of access led to numerous pranks being pulled, but most of us were savvy enough to figure it out and undo the prank. However, we had two co-workers who liked to loaf a bit too much for our liking. They were not at all technical and had taken the lab assistant job because they thought it was easy money. They had conspired to be assigned to a remote classroom lab, that rarely had any students in it who would need assistance, for most of their working hours. They would just sit around and play games on the PCs while the rest of us were, working. Clearly this could not stand. I rewrote a piece of code that was executed when every single user signed on. If the username was either one of these two and they were signing in on a PC in that remote classroom and it was during their working hours, it would look at an innocuous file on the network. The file merely had a few bytes in it which noted how long it had been since this prank had last been triggered, ensuring that it would run once or twice a week maximum. If it did activate, it would launch a terminate and stay resident program which would wait a random time, between 5 to 15 minutes, and then drop an image of 2dude69ing on the monitor for a few seconds and reboot the PC. Tested it. Put the compiled program in place and deleted the source. Much hilarity ensued for the next 2 semesters. Well, this seems to have struck a chord with more than a few. Here's an interesting bit that I did not share initially. This was the late 80s, early 90s, and decent online porn, much less gay porn, didn't really exist. Think ASCII art. So where did I find this image to use? One day I, and a few of the other student workers, were playing around with a new disk utility that helped visualize where space was being used, an important thing in the days of 20 MB hard drives. We had meant to use it to see where some of our network storage had gone, but the utility scanned all the drives on a PC including the networked ones. At the time, as fate would have it, sitting in the CD-ROM drive was a Borland Turbo C installation disk. It popped up in the final report as having a single hidden directory, labeled XXX of all things, that contained more data than the entirety of the Turbo C installation combined. It was all porn and in high-resolution 640x480 VGA. Glory to boot. A hidden folder containing nothing but pornography had somehow managed to be included on Borland's CD-ROM that had been purchased by thousands of businesses and educational institutions. My mom's laptop wallpaper was a picture of her granddaughter. I copied the picture 100 times and made her wallpaper a slideshow of the same picture over and over again, so the file would change but nothing would change visibly on the monitor. The pictures would change every 10 seconds. On one of the images I painted a tiny little curly mustache on her. So randomly for 10 seconds my niece would have a mustache. My mum thought she was either losing her mind or had a computer virus, and every time the mustache popped up, it was gone by the time she tried to show anyone. One year, my sister had to move back into my parents' house. I was like 15, she was a little older, mid-20s. April Fool's comes, and I know my sister woke up at like 6 a.m. So I took out the light in the kitchen, put Vaseline all on the refrigerator handle, and put a rubber band around the water gun on the sink. I waited for her to go in the kitchen. I was in my room pretending to be asleep, and all I heard was shit. Followed by a shit. Followed by her screaming my name and waking up my parents. My parents were not happy. Floor was soaked with water, and it woke both of them up. I'd do it again though. Water gun thing, there is a small little black sprayer to the right of the sink. You pull it out, it has a hose connected to it, and you can spray down dishes and such. I used to work at a science tutoring center when I was in college and my gap year before professional school. One of the things we taught very often was anatomy. So naturally we acquired a few skeletons and various skulls with some variation in how they looked or were marked, etc. Well, I was closing one night, and I knew my coworker was opening the next morning early, so before I locked up I assorted all of the skeletons and skulls in a welcome party near the front door. I had one immediately at the opening of the only door into the room with several backup skeletons and skulls just behind at a table together watching on. The best part was that you have to turn on the lights manually and that switch is immediately to the side of the door opening, so when she reached down to turn on the lights she had to come face to face with some lifeless skeleton skull in the middle of the shady opening. Needless to say she screamed, and it was loud enough to make our boss come to see if she was okay. Woke up to some colorful texts LMAO. Still proud of that one honestly.